I call to order the meeting of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee. If there's no objection, I'd like to switch the order of what we had on the agenda and go through the fire apparatus first, so Jenny can participate in her dad's 85th birthday. Woohoo!
It's a Zoom party.
Yes. So let me give you a little brief update of what went on. As you know, last year the Board of Selectmen took out $500,000 for the accrual for the fire engines. This year they voted to take out $838,000. And that number keeps on rising and rising.
Hey, Jack, when you say take out, what do you mean?
They cut it.
They cut it.
Okay, cut it. Okay.
Last year, $500,000 was cut. The accrual for the fire engines were cut. This year, $838,000 was cut because the Board of Selectmen said that they liked bonding, which I do as well. The reason for it is the methodology for the accruals are calculating out what the fire engine would cost in the year that it's being purchased. And many of these are 2025 year items. And they have a 3.5% annual multiplier to the cost. So effectively in 20 years, a $1 million fire engine, 20 years out, is going to cost $2 million. The amount is not discounted, and they're straight lining the $2 million for these 14 items each year, which, number one, I don't believe is good corporate finance. It should be discounted. There's so many things that are going on, but it's also a non-sustainable view for the next 20 years and the next 10 years. In fact, by bonding, using the current rates and everything else, getting into the de minimis clause, which Jenny can explain in that, it takes 17 years of debt service to equal the $838,000. 17 years before we hit there. And because the fact that they're always accruing for a fire engine that costs twice as much as the one that we just bonded, from a cash flow perspective, the taxing of our citizens will always be significantly higher than debt service. And I have a problem with that. And that includes interest. So with that, I asked Jenny if she could go, and since she had nothing to do, to calculate out 14 fire engines in the year that they were going, what their debt service would be, what the accrual would be, the debt service would be for the next 20 years, using the information that was provided to us by the town of Darien for fire engine replacement. And now I'll let Jenny go and explain it because she'll be better than I am. Jenny, are you muted?
I am, thank you. Sorry about that. So I wanted to present we took what the town does on an accrual basis and sort of ran it out all the way to like 2050. And sorry for for those of you who are not able to open the spreadsheet, my apologies. I can still try to send it in another format so we can go over it. But this is effectively what I tried to send you.
It can be zoomed. I mean, you can zoom in and enlarge it on the screen.
Yeah, I can. So these are the assumptions, which, when we pay for fire engines, you put a 25% down payment on, and then they get ordered, and then within probably 12 months, 18 months, you are paying for the rest of it. That's how they do it now.
I'm going to correct, from 18 to 24 months, so it's as much as 2 years later.
Yes. And we took the assumption that you would bond 100% of the cost of the fire trucks. And as Jack said, they are assumed to accrue at a 3.5% rate per year. Wait,
I want to use the word so we're not using accrue twice. They are anticipated to increase in value by 3.5% compounded annually until the next time.
Yes. So I'll show you, I'll come back to the summary notes. This is what the, yikes, this is what the, this is what Kate had, what Jen had provided, which is somewhere in our email, which showed the anticipated purchase of future fire engines, 14 in total. I took the liberty of translating that top schedule up here to what the annual appropriation for each fire truck is per year. And in yellow, these were the numbers that had been omitted in the accrual estimates by Jen. So we just filled it in. And what you come out to in the end here is this, you're talking 41 million over time of accruals if you keep going. So this is basically a de facto debt service schedule that currently we prepay for fire trucks for. So I took the liberty of running some debt service schedules based upon, tax exempt bonding. This is the first fire truck. It's $1,301,000, assuming pretty high cost of issuance and an underwriter's discount, whatnot. This is the par you would have to issue. And so each one of these is the estimated total amount of bonds, this number here, that you would have to issue to pay for those fire trucks that are highlighted in gray. And of course, we all know that debt, there's not only interest expense, but you have cost of issuance, which when you have a very small amount to borrow, the cost of issuance, you have sort of diseconomies of scale. So in theory, this would I don't know that you would bond for very, very small amounts, but if you would either this could be included in another bond issue, because we know that we bond every couple of years. But I think over a certain amount, a couple of $1 million, it starts to make sense. This tab, which you would see, is when you can open your spreadsheet. This is really what you're looking at, and this is what I did. Is I took this would be the debt service schedule for each fire engine at the time you need it. So they would issue bonds when they need to put the money down to pay for a fire truck. And as you can see, as we go out, it goes out later and later. So that the debt service schedule starts to, debt service schedule eventually, pays down. I should have put this with these dates, right? So in this first year, starting next year, the $1.3 million would be the first fire truck and so on. So this column here is column D is the aggregate total debt service, total principal and interest for every bond issue going forward for all 14 fire trucks. So it's basically over a 30-year period, because you're bonding, most of the fire trucks are 20 years, some are 25. There's also we're a little more conservative in our bonding estimates, because we're assuming we would finance a 25-year amortized fire truck over 20 years, which would make it a little more expensive. But most of the fire trucks are 20 years. So this...
I'm going to interrupt. Yep. We're not going, since all bonds are going to be 20 years.
Yep.
Even if there's a fire truck that's 25 years, one of the advantages is that for 5 years between the pay down of that debt service, that bond, and the 5 years until we have to buy the new truck, there's no expenses associated with that. Although on the accrual method, there's an expense every year. So even when we compare the accrual method to debt service, which we've consolidated those 4 or 5 fire engines from that have a 25-year life to 20, we are still much less than the accrual.
And I'll show you that in the next tab. But this will show you, this is basically the summary of all the total principal and interest payments for all the bond issues, 100% bonding. This is column D, and column F is your outstanding bond balance. So when you're calculating total indebtedness, you have to report in your audited financials. This is the bond balance. So it gets as high as about 10.5 million and then pays back down. So this is really the tab that we care about, that you're looking to understand. We're assuming, the grand list, we're assuming it's 8.5 billion, and it grows if there's an annual change in the mill rate is basically 50 basis points. That does not take into account basically the Federal Realty Norotan Heights project that is expected to come online, and that does not include the redevelopment in downtown Derry. So this assumes like no new redevelopment. This is just this doesn't assume any growth. This is just.
And I'll also say it's solely for an information purpose.
Yeah.
Our point here isn't to try and calculate out what the grand list is going to be in 10 years or in 5 years and what this cost will be to the overall grand list. But we did just a quick down and dirty on it. And I don't want to really focus on the grand list savings on the mill rate, because just the cash savings is significant.
And I think we can talk some. So you've got the total accrual method, which is this column here. Is column C is the actual amounts that should the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, if they're going to continue funding in the current manner, this is what the accruals would look like. This 828, 828, 955, versus if you did debt service. If you started bonding the fire trucks as you go, this is what the debt service would like. So this column E is really the budget relief. It's the savings it's a cash flow relief. It looks like savings, and then as we get, I didn't run the numbers past 30 years from now, because at one point what you're doing is you're swinging from prepaying to paying to financing in the future. So you're looking at basically 40 years of a swing in payments. So you have cash flow relief, budget relief, which is column E, and then we put the savings in terms expressed as in basis points of the mill rate. Et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how much in the weeds we want to get out here, but this is really.
Well, actually, the savings would be more. But the other thing that I want to emphasize is the cash flow is significant, because it's not just flopping 20 years of prepay to 20 years of post-pay based upon the fact that you're bonding. During the time that you're doing the post-pay, you're accruing for all the fire engines at twice the cost of what they're currently in the budget for, based upon the methodology that they're using. So, 3.5% compounded annually for 20 years or 25 years is over 100%. So again, that we're bonding for a $1 million fire engine, and during that same time in the post-pay, they're accruing for a $2 million fire engine.
Right.
Plus,
and
they've accrued up front.
Right. And so when you think about, when you think about the current method, if they're committed, you know, I think Bert had made a comment, if you're committed to this methodology, then there really should be a discount or at least a credit of interest earnings on the amounts being deposited and held for future payments. So this is, it should be indebtedness in terms of like it's a commitment to pay for those projects, because if this is the way you're going to pay for it, but because it can be cut, it could theoretically, you know, you got to catch up at some point in the future. And we talked, Jack, and we talked about, I don't know who came up with maybe it was Kate or Jen, but the term for bonding for something that you're going to use right now versus paying for or prepaying for something that you're not going to use in the future, they call it generational equity. So that's another factor to consider when, if you're gonna commit to bond this, or if you're gonna commit to pay for it, who are the beneficiaries of the spend of the which taxpayers get the benefit of the spend? So
I'm going to give, I'm going to give generational equity in a quick term. When we buy it, the people who get the use are paying for it, as opposed to everybody else paying for an asset that you might never get to see because you might have moved out of town or something else occurred, and they're buying this fire engine 20 years from now or 15 years from now, where you may or not be here. So I'm a firm believer, and we've done this in other cases, that those who get the use should be paying for it. And that's one of the other reasons for flipping to the bonding.
And
sorry, Jay.
That's okay. You know, the understanding that, you know, using debt is it's a really prudent tool. Particularly if you're managing your total indebtedness the way Darien does. They don't issue very much compared to the size of their budget, which is why you have a AAA rating. But we're talking about $1 million to $1.5 million and in some years, if you have 2 fire trucks to replace, maybe it's $2 million on you know, the impact on your total indebtedness, as you are also paying down outstanding debt from, let's say, a school bonding or whatnot. It's, you know, it's a relatively small amount and something the town can certainly manage. No question, you know, if municipalities use debt, while net present value savings is certainly important, cash flow management and budget management and certainly management of the tax rate is kind of what is a key driver for wanting to use debt. And just the other two, you know, I showed you this in the debt service, that the other tabs in here are really more a sample of what the coupons and the yields would be. And these, I did assume, I took one interest rate environment and ran it all out. I mean, we could run sensitivities till we were blue in the face, but based upon today's interest rates, your total real interest costs, Darien's total interest, if they came to market today, their total interest costs over a 20-year period would be less than 1.5%, and that includes taking into account pretty high cost of issuance on these small deals. So it's 1.5% of debt. So that, I wish you guys had a chance to see this a little bit live. I know it's hard to do on a screen, but you know, the other, as Jack pointed out, the current method does not discount. They're depositing an amount today that theoretically they don't need for 20 years. 19 years, 18 years, and so on as they get closer. I've also assumed that when they issue bonds, usually the bonds get bond proceeds. There's a little bit of time that the bond proceeds can earn some interest. Right now, it's not very much, but it's not zero. And you can be invested up to 3 years before you're required to spend all the money. And for these fire trucks, you're going to spend them within 18 to 24 months. So we assume no interest earnings. So I think these numbers are really conservative, but really it's to give you an idea that the impact of bonding versus the current method of accruing just has an impact to the taxpayer.
It also has an impact to the fire departments. If anyone recalls, when they were talking about the fire engines, in about 3 years out, happens to be a year where 3 fire engines are supposed to be replaced. And the Board of Selectmen were already discussing whether or not they could defer the purchase of one of those 3 fire engines into the subsequent year. If you're bonding, and again, we're really conservative because we're bonding all the proceeds in the first year, when in reality, you know, if it's $1 million, 250 is spent now, and within 18 to 24 months, we'd have to bond it within 18 months of the initial spend, according to Jen. So within 24 months, we could have bonded the rate, the purchase of it, which has certain years where we're not even paying upfront costs. The other thing that I don't like is last year this was manipulated, and any year going down the road this could be manipulated. And so the accrual has to be treated like a contract. It's not. And so to guarantee that the fire departments are getting their fire engines, making a decision that we're going to bond makes more sense. The cheapest fire engines here cost $800,000. We're bonding stuff for $170,000 and $200,000. So if that may or may not last as long as these fire engines are going to. We did, in conversation with Jen, decide that the public works trucks would not be bonded. They're under $250,000, and those we should be able to pay. And while they did do the same straight line accrual, I'm working on something that says that these should be deeply discounted, because we don't need significant funds sitting in the capital account, which also affects our credit rating, because it's assigned fund balance, where if we're not accruing and ending up with these large amounts, it's never going to be assigned fund balance. In addition, there's $1.3 million sitting in the account right now. And if we were to bond the fire engine that's currently on order, that would free up $1.3 million to either be added back into the general fund to replace the 1.8 we just gave the Board of Ed, or to be used to apply to other capital items in this year, where John Zagroski said in the operations meeting that the increase in the mill rate could be any place from 0 to 9%. So having some available funds from doing good corporate finance makes sense. So now I'm going to say people can ask questions.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, thanks, Jack. Just a couple of things come to mind. Again, I don't have the benefit of having opened the file, but I've been watching what Jen's been sharing with us in the meeting. But a couple of things. Do I have this right that at the present rate of the current accrual system or accrual method, that the charge to taxpayers in a given year basically is kind of like twice the cost that we would think would be necessary? Did I hear that right?
More than twice.
Okay.
So
okay. Fair enough. I just want to know what it's not. It's a multiple of what we think the cost should be, right?
Well, Jenny, go back to the thing you just had, the one before that showed. Okay, so this year they're asking the accrual method would have approximately 829,000. If we bonded, the cost to the taxpayer would be 80,000.
That's the
In
debt
fact,
cost.
that's total debt.
Debt service, yeah.
Right. We don't get to 829,000 until, I'm going to say, year 2039.
Okay. No, I understand that, Jack. My suggestion is this, is that when I look at comparing the current method to what we're saying here in this bonding proposal, okay, I see the savings. I understand that. I understand how long it takes to reverse that savings and go into a net expense situation, 40 years or plus. But the point I'm making is that if the current method employed by the town, the accrual method, to charge the taxpayers, we think is representing a cost that's twice what we have reflected in our analysis here, then it seems to me if we, instead of comparing what we think is a overstatement under the accrual method to what we think is the proper method, let's stress test the analysis and take the current method and have the current method spun out that reflects what we think is the true cost. So the cost-to-cost comparison in both of our analyses is held constant, and we really see the difference in savings just by virtue of the different approach we're taking. That's all. Because right now, the difference in cost is like an apples and oranges comparison. That's my impression.
No, it's not. It's not. The cost that we have in our model is the same cost that the Board of Selectmen are using in theirs. So if they're estimating that this fire engine that costs $1 million today, in 20 years is going to cost $2 million, we calculated the $1 million when we purchase it, or we calculated the debt service on the amount of what they're anticipating the cost is going to be, their number, not ours, their number, on what the cost is going to be at the time that it's supposed to be replaced. That's the chart that Jenny just brought up. There is no apples to oranges here. We're using their numbers.
Yeah.
And using their numbers produces this differential.
So the cost that we're looking to fund then, or finance, excuse me, is held constant in our scenario as well as in the town scenario. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that's not a source of or a difference that would be influencing analysis. The other comment I have is that under the bonding approach, the bond proceeds so raised are going to be set aside, as I understand it. Is there any kind of assurance that the money so raised cannot be tapped for other uses?
Yes.
Jen, I think you and I talked about that, I think, earlier. Can you address that?
Yeah, so very clear rules when you issue bonds. They go, and I'm not clear if the town uses a trustee or if they use the town treasurer to. They're bound to an agreement that when you disclose in an official statement to bond investors, you have to tell them what you're going to use the money for, and then you're allowed up to 3 years to spend the money. But it's subject to audit. It's highly regulated. So, and I don't think Darienne's ever had a question or an issue. They borrow money and they spend it on what they say they're going to spend it on as per the official statement, because they're making a representation to investors and the public that they're going to spend the money on what they said they were going to spend it on. So if you look at any of the town's official statements, there will be a description of the bonds and a description of the project. And it'll tell you, I think in the last bond deal, they spent some money for, it must have been for phase 1 of the Oxbridge School, plus they threw in a couple of, maybe a sewer and a sidewalk small project. There might have been a Highland Farm parking lot reimbursement. They disclosed that. So if they bond it, they are saying they're using it for fire trucks, they're using it for fire trucks.
Okay. Which kind of goes to the point, I think, more of a semantics point. And this is just, I know the word manipulation in prior years, what have you, maybe someone's manipulation could be another person's flexibility. And I think to your point, Jenny, you're saying if so bonded, it's got to be spent on the purpose as put in the bond indenture.
Correct. And bonding, the benefits of bonding is, it's a bond. It's aptly named, right? It's it removes any chance of something being taken out of a budget. It ties the hands of future administrators, or administration. Like if you're the debt service on the bonds can't be cut. So it's a contract. So and right now it's a commitment sort of, but it's subject to being cut.
That's a concept that Robert Moses employed for decades.
Yeah, but I also want to add two other things in my conversations with Jen. Number one, if we're issuing debt for the school, it's solely a school bond. They do not merge the school bond with the town bond. They keep it separate so that when they're repaying something, they know they were paying school or they were paying town. Number two, because when we are going to, right now it's a calculation that the town has made of what the future cost of each of these fire engines are going to be. When the fire engine is ultimately purchased, we know the exact amount of it before we're giving our 25% down. And so the only thing that might change that price of that fire engine, if within the 2 years they're building, they decide that they want yellow seats instead of red ones. So, it's the add-ons that you might do in a home improvement. But for the most part, these are the fire departments do an excellent job in defining exactly what they need and speaking with the companies that make the fire engines to know what's available and what would be required, as well as, because they also have to comply with any new regulations that came in from, there's a council in Washington, D.C. that defines what regulations and safety features have to be in a fire engine. So one of the new ones are that the side seats have to have seat belts. And they had to have a modification to that because when firemen are going in with all their equipment, the seat belt wasn't working. So too much.
Yeah.
So they've done that. But that's one of the things that are here. We'll know the exact price when it comes to bonding, as opposed to some guesstimate. And, we can call flexibility, and I like flexibility, but not in manipulating a budget for this year to kick a can down the road. This
Jack?
is going differently.
Jack, this is Bert. You guys can hear me?
Yeah.
So I love the word generational equity. All I know is about the federal government running up generational liabilities. So just so we understand, it's easier to say what's not happening than to say what's happening for people who can't really look at the numbers that Jenny has prepared so well. And so what's not happening is that we're not buying over the next 10 years fire trucks at the expense of a total of $5 million that we in the past may have set aside $500,000 a year. We're not doing $5 million worth of fire trucks over the next 10 years and borrow $5 million right now. Is that what do we agree on that?
No, I don't.
Okay. So we are borrowing $5 million. We are borrowing what we need for equipment for the next 10 years.
Over time.
No, we would borrow for the fire engine at the time of purchase. we're not upfronting a bonding for the
Yeah.
next 5 years. We're bonding it in the year that it's being repurchased,
Okay.
being purchased. So
So we
that's the
do it-
difference.
Bert,
Okay,
can you
so
see the screen?
you
You
throw
get
we throw it in with all other borrowings because
Mhm.
we probably wouldn't go in every time we have a fire truck. So we put it together with some other borrowings and do that over the next 10 years.
Well,
Right?
we do
It
it,
would average out maybe $500,000 worth of borrowing instead of $500,000 worth of set aside that the town for some reason calls accruals. Right?
no, because we haven't been doing 500,000, Bert. You got to use the numbers they're using. It's 830,000 going to $1 million.
this.
And we don't hit $1 million in debt service.
Yeah, Bert, this column here, column C. These are the actual numbers that the
Okay.
selectmen plans to set aside each year, and it
Okay.
grows
So
and it gets bigger and bigger.
they upped it from 500,000 to 800,000 because the equipment is getting more expensive or we need more of it, right?
I would say that their accrual method dictates if they're expecting the future cost of a fire truck to be 3.5% compounded annually to a point in the future. I don't know what the cost of a fire truck will be in the
And the
future.
That's
number,
the point, isn't it?
It doesn't matter because it doesn't matter. The cost is what it is. It doesn't matter how you pay for it. You pay for it every year, setting money aside, or you're borrowing against it. It's still the same cost. So that doesn't really change. So, and I agree with you guys. Apples are apples and oranges are oranges. Nobody has screwed around with the numbers. Okay. I'm not saying it's not a bad concept to finance things. I have a car lease. Okay, that's a method of financing. I just want to understand it and I want to make sure we can communicate it in a way that the people who are not financial bond experts, that they can, agree with us. That's all.
Jenny, can I just to amplify what Bert was just talking about? I mean, number one, I think this is very, very good. What is the devil's advocate argument for going with the accrual method? Is it just an aversion to having debt, which I think we all do in concept?
No, it is not.
Okay.
And anybody
just
who
asking.
says that, I'm going to ask why we're bonding $170,000 items on an HVAC that's lasting 10 years.
Yeah.
So whoever says that, and I'm just going to give the letters, is BS.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right. And
All right.
I actually have some other words I put with that.
Yeah.
It's a load of
listen,
garbage.
I understand that. I'm just trying. I first seek to understand. Okay.
I'm being
just
very
trying-
honest here.
Because
Jenny.
frankly, the only word I can come up with in terms of comparing these numbers that would justify the accrual method versus the financing method, given the set of assumptions, given the low interest rates, is rationalization. What's the rationalization for maintaining the current method?
I think because there were certain members on the Board of Finance that were against bonding fire engines. To give you a little history, this started in the 1990s, and when interest rates were about 5 to 6 to 7% for municipal bonds, fire engines cost a lot less, so they started the accrual methodology. It's gone on for years. They then brought in a company to estimate what the discounted rate should be, which is why we were at a 500 instead of this $8 to $1 million range. During the subcommittee on cleaning up the reserve fund for capital non-recurring items, several members of the committee, again, I was participant, but I didn't have a vote, decided to do a straight line accrual as opposed to low and then you increase it as you get closer to the purchase. So from a corporate finance perspective, the accrual for this should always be as close to zero as possible, because without making any comment on our investment income portfolio, we aren't bupkis, all right? And what Jenny was referring to is that we can invest in certain treasury items. The town does not do that. So what might occur in a larger city does not occur here. So that's the other reason we took investment income out of it. This is a simplistic way to say, here's what the accrual should be to come to the fire engines. I personally think, and I'm just going to make a number, if we're going to keep with the accrual methodology, which we'll see when I do public works trucks, I think we should be accruing for only 60 to 70% of what we think the truck is going to cost. Because if this account goes into deficit, because it's in the full reserve fund for capital non-recurring items, it does not matter. It does matter if we're building up $2, $3, $4, $5 million of money just sitting here, not earning anything for what we've taxed our taxpayers for. That's the big thing. We're overtaxing our taxpayers by not bonding.
I understand that. I'd like to just again ask follow up with Jen and the point that Bert was making in terms of trying to communicate this to non-finance majors. This would seem to be, I think we're all of a certain age where we might remember what the old Christmas club was like. Am I correct? Is this sort of like comparing putting money away in the Christmas club for buying Christmas holiday gifts versus borrowing money to pay for them and to purchase them? Is that a good way of looking at it, or am I wrong?
No. I'm going to answer that, Jenny. If you were to be putting the $5 away each week for the Christmas club,
yeah,
for the next 10 years or 15 years, so you could make Christmas purchases then and earning no money on that, then that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
If you're putting it away for 1 year, you get to use it for 1 year. We're not doing that. We're putting it away for 10, 15 years. So that's why that analogy may not be
okay. I agree.
Appropriate.
I agree with the analysis that Jenny's done, and that there's more than significant savings that we can render for the good of our taxpayers here by going to a bonding. I think it's a great analysis and a very good argument. And I'm wondering how anyone's going to come back and say that we shouldn't be doing this.
Well, there is one thing, but I do want, because Jenny does have to leave at a certain time. We did, because I don't want the challenge to how Jenny prepared this phenomenal model, mind you. This was not a simple thing. We've gone back and forth on it a number of times, and Jenny did all the work. I just said, can we do this? The fact is that we handed it about a week or so ago to Kate, Jamie, and Jen. And Jen said, this is a lot of work to read. And I think she sent it over to the financial advisor that we use for bonds and got back to either Jenny or myself today. By the way, we also had Louisa and Bert look at the analysis as well. Sent them copies before we sent it over to Kate, Jen, and Jamie. So, Jenny, do you want to go over the email that you got before this meeting from Jen?
I was copied, and I think it went to you, but I'm happy to go over it. So they shared it with their financial advisor, and basically they said, point number one, the assumptions in the model are reasonable and technically sound. Number two, bonding of fire apparatus makes sense if we're going to market for a larger issue with other projects. They're talking about economies of scale with the cost of issuance. Issuing for just one fire truck would result in a very high issuance cost. That's true.
And
But
we were never proposing that.
right, we weren't proposing that, but I ran it that way to show
Yeah.
these debt service numbers include standalone $1 million, $2 million bond issues that, yeah, that's an expensive way to do it. People do it, towns do it, but I don't think Darien ever issues for
But that means our expenses that we've included in the bond are higher than we would expect if we actually did the bonding the way the town does the bonding. That's the point of that.
Agree with that. They also said that they questioned they questioned the long-term view provided in the model. They said was not fair apples to apples to comparison because one, the total amount of cash accruals, it's like 41 million, which is this number down here. These are the cash accruals that if the town continues with its methodology, that's the number that you would get. They said, you're accruing for things that are not bonded. I said, well, you're accruing for things. You will be accruing for things that are not bonded. So this is basically the accrual debt service, if you will. And then they would recommend only focusing on a budgetary impact on the next 10 years, which we do, which is, this area right here. Okay, that's the
which has the number being even more dramatic because the bonds really are just first kicking off versus the accruals that are going for 10 years.
Right. And so this is what your next year, I ran it out to 2050, but it's honestly, it's pretty far away. Number 4, total expenditure will be more if we bond due to interest. Correct. Yes, there's debt services, principal and interest. So they, this number, the savings, it's not, I don't like the word savings, fair enough. It's cash flow relief, it's budget relief. Because ultimately you're going to have expense down the road, but it's far down the road. Like it gets, 40 years down the road, the impact of it versus the accrual method. And so basically they say, and they talked about how, some of the fire trucks are 25-year, technically they have a project life of 25 years, but we're paying for them with 20-year bonds. So that, which is, we agree with. Some vehicles have a useful life longer than 20 years. So there's a reserve contribution. I think they misunderstood. They thought where there was a 25-year fire truck, I actually accrued for 1/25. So I think they might be, we can correct that. I think we can show that we actually
No, they did accrue for one on 25-year fire engines.
Yes.
They accrued it over 25 years. We're bonding over only 20 years.
Right.
So we have a 5-year gap where we're not paying for anything. And I'm going to mention one other thing that Jamie mentioned, because we also have to think about what they've been talking about. As we start to see that the accruals go into $1 million, $1.3 million down the road, that's crowding out other infrastructure investments that the town could be making that isn't. And as we delay those infrastructure investments, not only do they become more costly because the prices go up, but also because in certain cases there's greater deterioration of what they're looking to fix. My favorite one was a dam that would have cost $50,000 if they did it up front, but they waited 8 years until somebody went through the dam as it broke and got injured, and it cost us like $150 to go do it, or like 50% more than had we done it, not counting the lawsuit. So
Bob's had his
this
hand
is
up.
crowding out other infrastructure investments. Who did?
Bob's had his hand up.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I guess just as a follow-on point back to Peter for a second is, I think the issue is not so much bonding, but it's the fact that the town seems to be over accruing or accruing in an improper way. And that then once you all agree on that, you then say, okay, well, if we're not accruing correctly, what's a good way to solve that problem? And I think it's Jenny and Jack, or at least the way that I'm reading them, and correct me when I'm wrong here, bonding is a more elegant way to do that.
I think that
with less friction.
Yeah, it's basically you're optimizing your costs instead of being on 3.5 provided by the manufacturers. You're really bonding you're issuing at a rate that will be 165 and already locking a long rate. So I think you are optimizing your cost.
Right. And you know, so for the people who, excuse me, for the people who are intuitively opposed to bonds because there's an interest expense to it, it's really I would say, yeah, that's true, but the way, like you said, Bob, the accrual method is what's the polite way to say it? It's not, since it's not being discounted. Since it's not being discounted, it's probably accruing a little more than you need. And you know, an impact of this on the Board of Selectmen's budget is significant because the size of their the cost of this, the accrual on their budget is quite large. I mean, you know, 700,000, 600,000, you know, in cash flow savings can do a lot to, you know, pay for things, you know, other capital projects and other needs in their budget without impacting the tax rate. So I would say that, again, the amount of debt that you're talking about is a pretty small amount when you look at the total indebtedness of the town. And if you look at the bond balance, hang on a second, this one, you look at this outstanding bond balance on all these fire trucks, they, you know, they peak out here in 2050, but they get paid down pretty quickly. And you're also, you know, you've got other bonds that you're paying down too. So that you have to look at your total amount of indebtedness relative to the budget and relative to all the reserves and everything that Darien has that makes it a AAA credit. So I think the argument for people who are against bonding, I would say, then, you know, what's the line? Why, you know, in a couple of the last bond issues, as Jack said, they'll bond for small projects like $200,000 projects, or, you know, a little bit of sewer, a little bit of sidewalk, like, you know, some parking for way under $1 million. So why is that okay? And why would fire trucks, which you actually would get some economies of scale on the cost, what, you know, why there and not for fire trucks? So I think I would try to understand the rationale there.
And Jenny, I'm going to tell you, you have to go. You have to be out at 8 o'clock, right?
I have 10 minutes. I can wait for 10 minutes, but 8:10's my hard stop.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is, if there's questions, get them to Jenny, myself, Louisa, because next Monday's meeting, I'd like to take a vote so that we have a sense of the meeting on what the committee feels about bonding versus accrual. I will have a presentation. I do want to let you know, and we'll cover this in the buddy system, I have been informed by Jim Palin and by John Zagroski that any comments by an RTM member will not occur during their budget deliberations meeting. So we don't even get the little chat that we had with Jamie. But we have 3 minutes in public comment to tell them where they screwed up. So I'm sorry I'm being blunt with them, because that was one of the most ludicrous conversations I had while I was on vacation. So,
And if anybody can't open the spreadsheet,
and I'm on the record now in case anybody's listening to it.
and if anybody has a hard time opening the spreadsheet, I will try to like figure out another way to get it to you, because I know a couple of people can open it.
Okay.
Thank you, Jenny. Great work,
Thanks,
Jenny.
Jenny. Great job.
Sure. How do I stop sharing my screen?
Applause, applause.
Is it there?
See.
No. Can you kick me off?
I will try to kick you off.
Oh, wait, I got it.
Bye, Jenny.
Yep.
Enjoy the birthday party.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
All right, thank you.
for the presentation.
Yep, you bet.
So, Jack, are you saying the Board of Finance doesn't want to hear from us next Tuesday, or they
I
are?
have been told, no, I'm going to be very blunt. I have been told that they do not want or expect any conversations for the buddy system during the time that they're discussing the any of the findings, deliberations, or anything like that. If we anticipate that we might disagree or we have something to say, we have to notify them on Monday before the meeting, so we have our 3 minutes in public comment to make a comment before they comment. That's how they want to operate. It's because of that that I shut down the Board of Ed buddy teams, with the commentary coming that there was no reason to have the conversations which Taylor and I had previously when she was vice chair with Paul and Frank. They don't want to have discussions. There was one that occurred and it was out of the ordinary. They really don't want to have discussions, just pass our questions on to them and they'll give us answers. The rationale for the Board of Ed from them was, in reality, we could go, that both the Education Committee and F&B can go directly to Duke and Dr. Adley to get answers, which is absolutely true. The concept is to have some feeling of where they were thinking and what some of their thoughts on the Board of Ed budget might be, as well as expressing some of ours. That being said, while they look at that we're not meeting with department heads, F&B 3 years ago stopped meeting with department heads and took Kate as being the focal point for the budget, no different than we were looking at the superintendent until the Board of Selectmen voted on that budget, or the Board of Ed voted on their budget. But the same way that we can go to Duke and Adley, we can also go to Jen and Kate and get the same answers. So it's similar, but we'll see to work through the buddy system this year as best we can, and then we'll do a post-mortem on this year and figure out how to go forward. I do think there's been some good conversations. I know that I spoke to Adele, and Adele thought that the F&B and Park and Rec, just had a separate meeting and they discussed a whole bunch of items over there and information, and that went well. So with that, let's open it up to anyone who wants to speak on how their buddy system has gone, where they are, or any points on this budget that provide some concerns. Or will you support, for that matter? Mike?
Mike's ready.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Just quickly to report on my experience. Dan submitted my questions to Kate, and she responded to the questions. In a few instances, though, the responses were incomplete. And I related this to the team, including members from P&Z, Mike Caslow and Amy Chickles, and explained why I believe more complete responses were called for. As far as I know, my remaining questions are still open, and I'm unclear why this is so. For us, or for me, the buddy approach channeled all of our dealings through the Board of Finance, as you just mentioned, our colleagues there, and with no direct RTM contact, again, as you said. So the Board of Finance acted as a gatekeeper as such in our case, which is fine so long as views are exchanged and folks feel that their input is valued. I feel otherwise. Without that, the approach is ineffective and simply denies a fair hearing of views. And I believe the review would suffer and does suffer as a consequence. So those are my thoughts at a high level in terms of my experience.
Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, Jenny and I met with other members first of the Parks and Rec Commission, and then we met with Dan and Rob, and it went very well. And actually, unlike last year when we were looking to cut a little, we asked them to try and put back in a little money for the Pear Tree Point Beach bathrooms, since they were spending money on the concession. But all in all, it was a good experience.
Yeah, you have the special case that I'll discuss offline of why your meeting occurred.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, after
Anybody else?
Numerous discussions with Beth and with our colleagues on the education committee, we agreed to have some informal discussions. We just haven't been able to schedule them yet, given the fact things were sort of up in the air for a couple of days. And we hope to be able to have some discussions, at least with our RTM colleagues on the education committee, on the budget in short order, hopefully.
Stacy, how did you and Lisa, how is your police thing going?
So for police, they our buddies reached out to us and just asked for our questions. There's no conversation back and forth. We were just supposed to submit our questions, and so that's it.
So apparently, in the past, you had conversations with your two buddies. Is that not correct?
Yes, in the past we've met with them either in person or on Zoom to discuss and have a conversation and work together. But this year we were directed to just give our questions to them and by a certain due date, and that was it.
Okay. Well,
Which that mirrors my experience, Jack.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I have a feeling that some people are not in favor of the buddy system. I had a conversation with Jim Palin, who could not understand what the value of any of the discussions would be. And then he proceeded to tell me how to run the F&B committee.
not as purview.
Well, he used to be on it.
Right. Basically,
right? Jim used to be the chairman at one time.
yes, so he had his opportunity to do it. I basically told him not his purview. So we're going to have to figure out if there's things that we want to discuss, how we discuss it at the meeting. There's a couple of things that I want to discuss. One is the bonding. The other is I'm going to step a little bit out of our lane, because while they're talking about using some of the contingency that's sitting in the capital accounts to pay down some of the capital, I've asked for 2 years for them to come up with similar guidance to what they had in the general fund. And so I'm going to take 3 minutes to tell them where I think the contingency level should be based upon some calculation. And it's not any place where they've had it. It shouldn't be more than $300,000-400,000, and everything else should be given back to the taxpayer. I also think that right now, if you're looking at their some of those reserve funds that have been sitting out there, they're being used for whatever they can to pay things down on the Board of Selectmen side, and running as many projects as possible through there. That because we don't have the detail, we don't necessarily know what it is. But the basic maintenance, town hall maintenance and renovation should have been someplace about 165,000, and at closeout it looks like it's going to be 135, and I don't have a problem with that. But that's part of the reason why we don't want some of these funds hanging out there anymore. So it does look like they will be closing things out, but I think there may be as much as 600,000 depending upon what happens with the bonding. If they choose not to bond, all right, then that's adding back approximately 830,000 back to Jamie's and the Board of Selectmen's budget, unless they're doing another kick the can down the road. So we should be looking, and I'm not suggesting cutting here or there, but you know, in certain things, like we asked for more detail on the 75,000 for the old senior center renovation coming out of the Public Works project, we should do that. I mentioned to Jim that there was a desire to have a conversation on bonding sidewalks, whether or not it's new construction or maintenance, and to have a real conversation about it, as opposed to, oh, we're going to bond this. You know, and if they decide it's going to be a one-off, that's fine, but they should be on the public record for it. So I don't like having an adversarial position, but, you know, we also have a financial responsibility to ask questions. With Mike's questions, I'm just going to forward them to Kate and Jen. We also have a significant amount that's going to be going into the general fund. The Board of Ed is a little bit shaky because it all depends on excess cost reimbursement. Currently, they're projecting a $670,000 budget surplus. But again, that depends upon the final percentage that they're going to get on excess cost reimbursement, and nobody's going to know that until April. So in speaking to Jen Chinesky, we're not anticipating a significant overage on the town side. So that handles the general fund. But, you know, I'm going to see if I can't get the Volpe report and start to get that around on what's going on. But if you don't get a response, let me know and we'll contact Kate or Jen to get the answer.
Jack, can I
don't know what else to say.
Can I just say something about the buddy system?
Sure.
I think when people were meeting in person, and so it was the buddies and us and the people with the answers, it probably worked. But I feel like when we are required to funnel all of our questions through the finance committee's members, and then they funnel back to us, there becomes a layer between us. Mm-hmm. And we are the RTM's information font, and we advise the RTM. And so I think that there shouldn't be that extra level between us. And it might be that this is just because of COVID and we're all Zoom and we're trying to, you know, so like if there is a one person writing the questions, and it should be copied to everybody. And when the point person in town writes back, it should be copied to everybody. And then you should still be able to allow to ask your own questions if you have a follow-up question that everybody's involved in. I don't like seeing a layer stuck between us. Yeah,
I think my sense on that, Iris, is that, I'm glad you said that, is that
I don't think it makes ugly about it. I just think it's weird.
I don't think the buddy system was in any way, or should be in any way, construed as a deference of us to the Board of Finance. Rather, I viewed it as a way of channeling the questions to keep the intrusions, if you will, on the budget owners to a minimum. It was a more efficient way of doing it. All right, and that's all it was. It wasn't in any way saying, oh, we're taking a backseat to the Board of Finance. And I think, unfortunately, as my experience at least has turned out, I feel that way, that it's kind of like, okay, pat on the back, we'll take care of all the questions and handle everything for you, and you sit back and in your place. So that's just my impression.
Yeah, I don't know how much of it is due to the fact that it's harder to meet through Zoom and that. Although when pushed, Rob and Dan were able to have a Zoom meeting on Park and Rec. But I think part of it is the anticipated change of management in the Board of Finance. And so we'll just have to figure out another way to skin the cat.
Yeah.
And, remember in the past prior to COVID, members of our committee, Bert, myself, Taylor at various times, Stacy, Martha, who would show up, Bob was there and several of the others, would show up at the Board of Finance meetings and discuss. And after a topic was discussed, John opened it up to the floor if there were other questions or comments going on. I don't know that we're returning to that when COVID is over next year. Different management style. And so we'll just have to figure out how to work it through. Because the other thing that I always thought was important, this came about when a year after Jim was the chair of F&B, and a member of our committee tried to cut the Board of Selectmen budget on the floor of the RTM, and there was a whole discussion about whether or not we needed a line item or didn't need a line item, whatever the case might be. And it left a bad taste between the Board of Finance, several of the members there, and the committee. So I sat down with John, who was new to his role as well, and we came up with this system because, number one, I don't want surprises on the floor of the RTM to anyone. Number two, reviewing the budget as what was the case in F&B after the Board of Finance had voted on it is like reviewing a budget after the horse has already left the barn. And the concept is that if we want to have input into something, if we feel strongly on something, it's better to have that discussion before they vote on the budget. Now, it's their board. If they choose not to allow participation from the RTM or only a 3-minute up front, that's their decision. But I hate to see somebody at the OPB meeting then talking and lecturing on transparency.
And collaboration.
So, and
yes.
Jack, maybe there need to be surprises on the floor this year, if that's what's going on. I know you don't want, none of us want surprises, but it's.
I think if there's prizes on the floor, it should be something that we feel as a committee should be done, and for the right reasons, not to teach a lesson.
I concur.
So, but I think all of us here are very committed to finding the best solution for the taxpayers, and at the end of the day, that's what we're going to attempt to do. So there's another meeting tomorrow by the Board of Finance. There is also, and our Board of Ed members can add to this, they're also going to be discussing renovations, and it looks like to remove portables at the Board of Ed tomorrow. And looking at the package that I'll send out, it looks like they're pulling back. The Board of Ed may propose pulling back a good number of their capital projects that they put in this year, and adding it into the overall renovation. I don't know, Stacy, Beth, Peter, do you have any more information on that?
No, but we'll try to get some.
There was a facilities committee meeting last week. What week is it? There was a facilities committee meeting in the last 2 weeks where they discussed this plan for the renovation. I mean, it should be no surprise to this committee or anyone in this town that it's been a goal of the Board of Ed to remove those portables, which would require additions.
The Gym
and
425 hot tub features 4 to 5.
What's that? Sorry. I thought I had interference here. So it should be no surprise to anyone that the Board of Ed is focused in prioritizing trying to remove their portables. But yes, it was discussed at a previous facilities committee meeting, and they will be discussing it tomorrow night at the Board of Ed.
Right. There's also, even though it's a little bit loosey-goosey right now, based upon the COVID relief plan passed by, since I'm blunt tonight, I'll be blunt all around, by the Democrats in the Senate and the Congress. There's funds coming to the town of Darien, and the amounts are up in the air, but there may be some limitations on how you can spend it. I do know that one of the things that are going on is that states cannot use it in theory to reduce taxes. So Correct. Just give a tax relief to everyone. And there's some challenges going on that from some AGs and some better definitions on that. But there is money that will be coming to the Board of Ed as well as the town. Jamie made, and I saw this commentary someplace else, but Jamie made an appropriate comment that if we're investing this money, and it's maybe as much as $2-3 million in total, if we're investing in the town, we should be cautious of what we're investing doesn't create incremental expense going forward, which we were not anticipating. So there has to be a balance act. I'm not aware of what the regulations are. I don't think it's going to be able to give us tax relief for this year's amount, but it's something that we should be aware of, and if we can get more information, that would be good. Is there anything else?
I have some information I can forward to the committee on at least the educational side of the funding.
Super, thank you. No other comments? Thank you for a very good venting system meeting, and and we're just going to move forward and do what we do, and hopefully everything works out. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Got minutes.
I see Louisa. Do we
Yeah,
hear a
got
second,
minutes.
Mike?
Got minutes.
Oh, we're not adjourning yet. We're not adjourning. Louisa, can you move that approval of the minutes?
Yeah. Yes.
And yes, and Beth is second.
Yep.
All in favor of the minutes as prepared?
Aye.
Say aye. Aye. Are there any nays? Hearing none, nobody's going to abstain, so that passes. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.
Now we'll take the. Oh, and I apologize for not sending it out. Wouldn't you figure that I was in the hotel from Hades with my internet going in and out? By the way, I was at a 3-4 star hotel that also had police called because a couple was arguing on the first floor that woke everybody up. And after I got done with listening to the Board of Finance meeting, the fire alarms went off for the next hour and 15 minutes. So it was a really pleasant stay in that hotel, which was, I'm not naming it, but it was a 3-4 star hotel that just had a bad week. Anyway, I will now take a motion to adjourn. I'll take Louisa again and Beth again. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all. Hope your brackets are working well.
Thank you.